talk today about how to be or to be an influential person. Brother Bob Thompson asked me to speak today, probably because he was going to be gone, and he didn't want to take a chance on missing anyone he wanted to hear speak. Okay? So sorry you're stuck with me. Glad to be here. Hope you guys are having a great first part of the semester. It's been kind of dark and wet and murky this year, hasn't it? And so that's okay with me. I spent about 28 years in a drought in Fresno, so I'm kind of glad to get back to some weather. I want to talk to you today about being an influential person. Maybe you don't think that that is your job, but I just have to tell you, you're going to influence where you are no matter what you do. Always because of your attitude, at least because of your attitude. You'll either be non-committal, a non-participant, or you'll be someone who tries to take over, or you'll be someone who tries to influence things by being a good example. That's who you are. This is something that the Bible makes very clear about us. We are going to have influence no matter where we are, either for good, for bad, or for bland. Now, one of the best movies, I've got a picture up here on the screen to start off with. This is from one of the best movies that I've ever seen about being an influence. The name of this movie is U-571. It stars Matthew McConaughey, and he is the executive officer, or XO, on a submarine during World War II, and his group, his submarine, has a special mission to go out and capture an Enigma machine. Now, an Enigma machine was the coding machine that the Nazis used to write their secret communiques. If the Allies were able to get a hold of one of the Enigma machines, they would be able to decode the Nazi secret messages, and they would know their battle plans in advance. So this was a big deal. They sent out this Black Ops force to capture this machine. It was on a submarine called a U-boat. As a matter of fact, that was the name of the boat, U-571. And the Americans were in an American submarine. There was a battle during a storm when they finally encountered. Previous to leaving, the captain, or the lieutenant commander who was in charge of the ship, told the character played by Matthew McConaughey, the XO, that he exhibited such poor leadership among the crew that when they returned from this mission, he was going to have him demoted. He was going to have him taken off his ship and hopefully decommissioned. So he started on this journey with a really bad feeling. When they got into this battle, the United States submarine was sunk, and the captain was the last person off of the submarine, and he subsequently drowned. This put the XO, who had exhibited very poor leadership, in charge of the mission. He was absolutely terrified. They commandeered the German submarine, and they got underwater. They got it below decks, or they got it below water finally, and they looked around, and all of the directions and all of the dials and all of the instructions on everything were written in German, and there were only 2 or 3 people in the entire crew who understood any German at all. So the crew didn't know what to do. They felt absolutely helpless. And they turned around to him, and the first time anyone ever called him captain was right then. They said, "Captain, what do we do?" And the new captain, looked at them and said, "I don't know." Now there's a fellow there on the left. That's the actor Harvey Keitel, and he played the chief of the boat. Now the chief of the boat is kind of like the master sergeant in the Army. This is the guy, it's his job to know the crew, and it's his job to know the staff. He knows everything about everybody. And when he heard the captain say, "I don't know," he said, "Skipper, can I speak to you privately for a moment?" And so they went into another room, and he looked at him and he said, "Now I don't ever want to hear you say, 'I don't know' again." To these boys, a captain is a terrible and a mighty thing. The skipper always knows what to do, especially when he doesn't. Now get out there and take charge of this boat. And so he did. Now, how could this guy, who was not an executive officer, he was mid-range, he was mid-management, how could he speak to the captain like that? It's because he had influence with the crew. But not only that, he had influence with the captain. While this guy was coming up in the ranks, he had been influential in this man's life, giving him direction. That's how he achieved influence. He had influence with the captain before the captain died. He was the one who'd managed to keep the guy on the boat this long. A person of influence is someone that really, in our world, in our way of thinking, a person of influence is someone God has placed in your life. He's there to be listened to. One of the greatest examples of a person of influence in the Bible is the prophet Samuel. From the time he was about 9 years old, he was an influential person. He could influence the man, the priest, who had been charged to raise him up to serve God. He told him what to do. By the time he was a young man, everyone in Israel, we'll look at this verse, what it says here. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, learned that Samuel was a prophet of the Eternal One and that his words could be trusted. From time to time, the Eternal continued to appear at Shiloh, where he had spoken to Samuel. And all of Israel was influenced by Samuel's words. Why did Samuel have influence with the people of Israel, all of them? Because he had influence with God. He talked to God. From the time he was a little boy, God had spoken to him, had called out to him, and he had answered. You might say, well, that's not anything I'm ever going to be involved in. Phooey. God has a call for every one of you. Every single one of you. You know how I know that? Because in order for you to become a Christian, he called you. He called you. Maybe he whispered in your ear. Maybe he got in your face. But he called you. This is God's grace reaching out, offering salvation to you. And that grace doesn't go away. It just varies itself based on the situation. If you're sitting in a hospital emergency room, God's grace is calling out to you to give you guidance and give you comfort. If you're trying to make a decision, God's grace is calling out to you. When God is talking to you, he's trying to find some influence. And usually, he's going to talk through someone else. He's going to speak through your pastor. He's going to speak through your mom. He's going to speak through your friend. One time, one of the most convicting messages I ever got from God was from my 5-year-old son. God calls out to us through people who have influence with us. Now, what is an influential person? John Maxwell, and I guess my thing went away. What did I do? Oh, sorry about that. John Maxwell, who is the slide is gone. Now I'm stuck. John Maxwell, I'll just read it to you anyway, says leadership is influence. If you have influence, you are a leader. Okay, here's how this works. The leader is the person everybody listens to. There he is. The leader is the person everybody listens to. Here's how this works, okay? When you're in one of your team meetings, something like that, or you're in a class meeting and the teacher gives directions or the coach gives directions, does everybody just listen and do what they're told, or is there someone else they look at in the room to see if that person buys in? Is there? Now, if there's someone else they look at, the coach or the teacher is not the person who is influencing that group. What if they're looking at you? What are you going to do? What if they're all looking at you and you suddenly realize, I'm the one with influence here? That happened to me once, and I couldn't have been more shocked. In my last class in seminary, I was in a course that I just absolutely hated, and I had saved it till the very end. Human development. It was awful. I'll just tell you, there were 6 required books, I think. That was the textbooks. There were 10 outside books that you had to read and write reports on. And when I got done with this course, I had 3 full notebooks full of handouts. And I was responsible for every bit of that material, and I was going to get tested on it. Do you have any teachers like that? Do that to you, other than Denny Kuhn? You have anybody like that? No, you probably don't. Now, see, everybody knew that that's what this teacher was like. And I had put her off till the very end. But I had to take it because it was a core course. And so I was sitting in this classroom, and she would just try to get discussions going, and I would just sit there. And then one night, during break, she came up to me, and she said, "Greg, you hate my class, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, Dr. Friesen, I really do." And she said, "Why is that?" I said, "It's just, there's just so much to read in here." She said, "Is there anything I can do to make it better?" I said, "You going to drop some of the reading requirements?" "Nope." "Then I guess not. But, I'm a grown-up. I'll get through it." So she said, "Okay." And she looked really sad. And she went back to class, and then we all went back in there, and we started the class again. And she tried to get a discussion going, and instead of staring at my book for a change, I looked up and I noticed something, that when she asked the question, about half the people in the room were looking at me to see what I was going to do. And suddenly I had a realization. I don't know, if you've not been around me very much, you may not know this. You may think I'm just the guy who gives you your book problems. But I really like to have a lot of fun. I really do. I think having fun is just wonderful. I don't think there's anything wrong with having fun. I think, as a matter of fact, most of life is fun, and the secret to a successful Christian life is to find a way to have joy in everything God has called you to do. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, have a way to have fun. Make it fun. So I try to have fun in everything I do, but I wasn't making that class fun for anybody. And that was usually what I did in a class. I was usually the guy who just made when things got a little tense, I made an ignorant remark or something, and people would ha, and then they'd relax and everything. And then we'd go back to having a good discussion, and tempers would lower a little bit. But I wasn't doing that in this class. I was just sitting there. And I looked at these people, and I realized that everyone else in that class had done the very same thing that I had done. They had put off this class till the very last semester, because they were all dreading Dr. Friesen's reading assignments. And so when she asked a question, I made a stupid remark. Now, I don't remember what it was. Most of my remarks are stupid. Most of them are just completely forgettable, But I made a stupid remark like I did in the other classes, and people laughed. And she looked so happy. And when I made that stupid remark, people started making comments in the class. Every week I had to do that in order to get the discussion started. That very night she gave us a quiz. Now her idea of a quiz was 10 essay questions. That was her idea of a quiz. You see, you think we're crazy here. 10 essay questions on the reading that we were supposed to have done during the week. And this is what she said when she passed it out. Now, don't make your answers long, because I don't like to read a lot. And I said, "You don't like to read a lot? I'm going to write mine in Hebrew, so you have to go get it translated." That just got all over me when she said that. But that was, however stupid, a good use of influence, because it got the class to relax. But she never was the leader of that class. I was always the influential person in that class. That never happened to me in any other classes there, but it happened then. An influential person is the one that everybody listens to. That's the law of leadership. When the real leader speaks, people listen. Now, here are God's purposes for an influential leader. Sometimes you don't know what to do. Sometimes I don't know what to do, and I need someone who has credibility with me that I will listen to. I had this person, I really love him just so much. I've known him all my life. I love him so much. And they started having marital problems. And do you know who they went to for advice? You know who she went to? A bunch of divorced women. Now, what do you suppose they told her to do? Leave him. Leave him. And so she did. And do you know when we all found out she was leaving him? After she had already moved out. She didn't ask anybody. She didn't get anybody's influence other than these women because they gave her a silver bullet. To her, these solved all her problems. So I want to tell you something that you have to do today. Use the influence God has given to you. Now, this is from a really old movie, that picture up there in 1977. Probably, this was actually back before people had hair. And so most of you don't know anything about this, but does anybody know who this is? Obi-Wan. Thank you, geek. I appreciate you so much. Yes, you're my new favorite. Use the influence God has given you. There's a great story in the Bible, one of the best stories of example that there is in the Bible, and that is one day Saul, the guy who was going to become the first king of Israel, his dad was pretty wealthy. His name was Kish, and a bunch of mules wandered off. And he told Saul to go get the mules, go find the mules. And he sent a servant along with him. Well, they were out looking for a couple of days. And finally Saul said, we better go home. Dad's going to be sending out a search party for us. And here is what the servant said. Not so fast. There's a holy man in this town. He carries a lot of weight around here. What he says is always right on the mark. Maybe he can tell us where to go. And Saul listened. Now, why do you suppose the servant got sent along in the first place? Because the father listened to this servant. He had influence with him. You know what? What I've learned over the years, most really, really, really influential people are servants. They just have a servant's attitude. Whether they are an underling or whether they're leading the organization or whether they're the coach or whether they're one of the players, whether they are the guy, whether they're the water boy like Bobby Boucher, they just have a servant's attitude. They like to help people. That is their whole goal in life. Who always gets your attention? Who's the wisest person you know? Who do you know who has lived in a way that they're unashamed of, and you want to connect yourself with that? That's the person you need to be following, and that's the person you need to emulate. You need to be that kind of person. I really do believe this servant went along with Saul because his dad was trying to get Saul to be this kind of influential person, but you know what? He never was. He always just followed his impulses everywhere he goes. Secondly, it's who God created you to be. One of the truly unique and useful people on this earth. One of the great books of the Bible, Proverbs, says, the words a man speaks are deep waters, a flowing stream, a fountain of wisdom. Now, let me tell you something about this place you're sitting in right now. Okay? When I was here, it was about a quarter of the size it is now. I started here in 1975. But while I was here, I knew that every person I encountered was dedicated to one thing, and that was creating Christian character in me. It was hard work to do that because I wouldn't listen to anybody. The president's receptionist, Jane Herron, got on to me about something every time I walked in the building. Every time. She was always pushing me to be a better person. When I started dating my wife is one of the best people anybody knows, and nobody could believe she was dating me because I was such a knucklehead. I'll tell you something, and this is the God's honest truth. Everyone I knew tried to talk her out of marrying me, including my mother. My mom sat on her bed in the dormitory and cried and said, please don't get married to him. He will make you so miserable. He's just awful. He's the biggest brat you've ever seen in your life. This is the kind of support network I grew up with. Is it any wonder that I stress eat? No, it's not. Now, but every one of them was dedicated to turning me into something more than I was, to try to influence me. And I had so many great influencers. There's only one of them left here, and that's Tom Marbury. And I've never known anybody who pressed me towards integrity and hard work more than Dr. Thomas Marbury. If you are fortunate, if you're blessed enough to be in one of his classes, you should thank God. Because you're not only going to be a better scholar when you get done, you're going to be a better Christian. Because he is completely, he's like this guy in the Bible that Jesus identified one time. He looked at a guy named Nathaniel and he said, there's a man who's completely without guile. No hypocrisy. That's Dr. Thomas Marbury. My admiration for him only grows the older I get and the more I watch him. He's the same man I knew, the same man I met in the boys' dorm in 1975. He is one of the finest people I've ever known. And Wilma, you're here today. Don't tell him I said that. Okay? But he is one of the finest people, one of the greatest Christian men that I've ever known in my life. And I can't hardly talk about him without crying anymore. But I'll just tell you something. Tom Marbury knows what job one is around here. And if your coaches aren't trying to create Christian character in you, and if the rest of the teachers aren't trying to create Christian character in you, and if I'm not trying to create Christian character in you, we are failing miserably in our jobs. And you need to pray for us. You need to influence us through God in prayer. Now, here's a really important reason, and this is kind of on the negative side of it. If you don't exercise your influence for God, somebody who doesn't love God is going to exercise their influence to get someone away from God. I know that for a fact. I've seen that all my life. Here's one of the things Isaiah said about this. Strangers will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards. There's always somebody ready to try to get you to do wrong. There's always somebody who wants to do that. Now, let me put this in very practical terms. And I'm going to tell you this because I had a girlfriend like this. My first girlfriend was like this. She hated my mom. She hated my mom. And she was always telling me she hated my mom. And I loved my mom. My mom was great. Everybody loved my mom. And one day it occurred to me, how come my girlfriend hates my mom and everybody else loves my mom? And it suddenly dawned on me that my girlfriend just might be selfish and crazy. But I was terrified of her. And I was so grateful when my dad accepted a church in southern Missouri and we moved away. Because I never had to go through that again. Now I'm going to tell you something. Be braver than I was only 12, by the way. Okay, that was... But, I was pretty much the ladies' man already. But I didn't have, I couldn't stand up to her at all. I was terrified of her. But, good grief, you're young adults. If your girlfriend's always telling you she hates your mother, she's just trying to get you to divide against your mother and choose her. And let me tell you what you're going to get when you choose your girlfriend above everybody else. Then she's going to start nagging at you. And she's going to start griping about you to everybody else. So dump her now. Do it. This is advice from my life. Dump her now. Change your cell phone number. But have somebody keep an eye on her Twitter page. Just saying. Okay. If you got a boyfriend, this part isn't funny because I've sat in my office with too many crying girls over this. You got a boyfriend who's always nagging you for sex. Dump him. Dump him. There's a word for a guy like that. He's just a horn dog. That's all he is. And once he gets through with you, you know what he's going to do? He's going to go to someone else. He's just going to leave a string behind him because I used to be a boy. I know how boys are. The greatest thing about being 60 is you no longer have the wherewithal or the energy to do that kind of thing. You're just tired all the time. Okay? Now what you need to do is ladies, take charge of that boy because he doesn't have the brains to take charge of himself. And he doesn't have the character to take charge of himself. If he says, if you love me, you'd let me, you say, if you love me, you wouldn't ask. Dump him. He's bad news. Okay, now I'm going to move really fast because I got 2 minutes. Being influential for God is a pain. It is a pain. It is a royal pain. There's a ton of responsibility and effort that goes with it. If you decide to be an influential person, it will be messy, but it is creative chaos. Here's one of the things Solomon said, "Where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox." Now, what does this mean? If you're not trying to raise any animals on your farm, your barn is always spotless. You never have to sweep it out. But if you're actually producing something on your farm, there's going to be a mess every single day. You might be a great janitor, but you ain't much of a farmer. And the point of a farm is to produce, isn't it? Right? So guys, let's understand this. There is no pain-free success for God. Second thing, nobody wants to be the bad guy, but that's the job. Here's the verse that goes along with it. "He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly." Now, people who love their children discipline them, period. If you do not tell your child no, if you don't give him corporate punishment when he needs it, then someone may end up giving him capital punishment later. I worked with the police for 10 years. I have seen both ends of this. A parent has got to get control of the kid. And sometimes if they don't have control of the kid by the time they're 5 years old, they've lost them for life. So get control of your children. If you resent it when your parents discipline you, you're a fool. That's what the Bible says about you. A fool won't listen to anybody, especially their parents. Now, here's a problem. When I was a kid, there was a TV show on called The Brady Bunch. Has anyone ever watched The Brady Bunch? Okay, probably the biggest lie that's ever been perpetrated on the social fabric of this country. And what it says is that a parent's main job is to be their kid's friend. Okay, the successful parent will be their kid's friend. Listen, if I had a friend who took away my car keys when they didn't like the way I drove, if they took away my phone when I was talking to my girlfriend too much, if they told me I couldn't go out with another friend because I had to stay home with them that night because their parents were coming to visit, they wouldn't be my friend very long. That's not a good friend. But parents have to do that kind of stuff. They have to do that kind of stuff all the time. That is the job of a parent. And so if you don't want to be mean, if you don't want to be the bad guy, do not have kids. Okay? And if you don't want to have responsibility and have to deal with somebody when they misbehave, don't even try to exert your influence. You just be their good time Charlie. You just show up when they're having fun and leave otherwise. Just be as shallow as you can. And you'll probably have a pretty stress-free life when you don't have to take responsibility for anybody. The next thing is plan to be an influential person. This one's pretty quick. Let's say you've answered God's call. Okay, I'm going to be an influential person. God has given me some tools. When I talk, people listen. What am I going to do about it? First of all, figure out what you can influence. Plans are failed for want of a counsel, but they succeed through many advisors. A ready response is a joy to a man, and how good is a word rightly timed. Most of the time, if you're influential in someone's life, you're going to try to get them to do something good or trying to get them to not do something bad. They may not always be happy to see you, but that's the job. You have to figure out what you can influence. And there's some areas in which people simply will not listen to me. They just won't listen to me. I don't have any credibility there. But I do have credibility in other areas. Secondly, figure out who you can influence. He who isolates himself pursues his desires. He disdains all competence. Some people, they just stop listening. It's sad, but some people cannot be influenced to make a good decision. They won't listen to anybody. The Bible calls these people fools. Jesus wept over the fact that in spite of being the Son of God and saying the words of life, he could not influence most of the people in Jerusalem. This was his lament. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, murderer of prophets, killers of the ones who brought you God's news. How often I've ached to embrace your children, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you wouldn't let me. And now you're so desolate, nothing but a ghost town. What is there left to say? Isn't that sad? Wouldn't it be sad if your mom had something like that to say about you? Third thing is figure out who, or figure out how you can influence. The first thing is be a good example. Greatest verse in the Bible about influencing people is this one from Proverbs 23:26. My son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. You got to set a good example for people all the time. Secondly, never, ever, ever depart from Bible teaching. If you're a child of God, God did not call you to tell people what everybody else thinks. He called you to give God's words in a situation. And God's words apply to no matter what situation you're in. Whether you're at work, whether you're at school, whether you're at family, whether you're on vacation, God's words apply to the situation. Now, sometimes you get called into a situation where you just have no influence at all. And I'm going to tell you about a time I went through this. I worked at California Christian College for 10 years. When we got done, we did about 2 accreditation studies and 3 state certification studies, revised the whole program. I was worn out, and so I just was dead. And so I went to a friend of mine who was a counselor to talk to him about it. He said, you're not going to get out of this unless you change your circumstances. So what you need to do is you just need to change jobs. You've done probably all you can do at that school, so you need to find something else. So I didn't know what I was going to do. When I resigned, my administrative assistant, Jennifer, who President Eaton lovingly refers to as Jenny Poo, she resigned as well. And she went to work with her father. Now, her father was a narcotics detective with the Fresno Police Department, and he was recruited to work for a methamphetamine task force that operated under the auspices of the federal government, the executive office of the president, in the Central Valley of California. 9 counties up and down. He was going up there all the time. She was the administrative assistant. And one day she called me and she said, have you found anything you want to do yet? And I said, no. She said, well, I'm sending you a job description. And she sent me a job description for something called an intelligence analyst. Now, that sounds a lot cooler than it is. Okay? You know what intelligence analysts do? They read a lot and they write a lot. They spend most of their time behind a computer or on the road traveling to another place where they're going to sit behind a computer. That's what we do, okay? But I was the first person other than Jennifer to be hired for this new task force. And the director wanted to interview me, so I went in to see him. And this guy, he was really cool. Probably the most charming man I've ever met in my life. Bill Rusameni. He was one of the original DEA agents. Now, I mean, he was one of the first guys hired when they set up the Department of the Drug Enforcement Agency. And so he's got years of experience in this. And he's sitting there with me and he says, I got to ask you a question. Does swearing bother you? And he said, most cops have filthy mouths. I have a filthy mouth. My wife is always on me about my mouth. Most cops have a filthy mouth. And Jennifer told me you're a preacher. And so if it's just going to make you upset every time you hear a guy say something around here, then, you probably shouldn't take the job. Now, I don't know what he knows about preachers, but preachers hear people swear all the time. Okay? If you go to a hospital emergency room, you're going to hear quite a bit of swearing. And some of it is going to come out of your members' mouths, okay? It's just going to happen. That's what happens because people have a hard time curbing their tongue, and it's just getting worse and worse as we go on. So I said, well, I don't have virgin ears, so, I won't let it bother me. It's the job. I'll take the job. So I went to work with him. And for the first couple of weeks, the only people in there were me and Jennifer's dad, Stan, and Jennifer and him. And then he started hiring other people. He started recruiting other cops to come in there. And by the time we were done, we had about 40 people working in there, and every one of them had a potty mouth. It was just horrible, just terrible, okay? And during that whole time, the only 3 people in the whole place who weren't swearing were me and Stan and Jennifer. Now, we got a new facility and we moved in, and it had its own coffee room. We never had that before. We just had a coffee pot sitting on the end of a desk somewhere. So the first day I went into the coffee room to get a cup of coffee, there was something sitting there on the counter. A swear jar. Now, I didn't do it. Jennifer didn't do it. Stan didn't do it. I think our boss did it. One of the reasons he did this was because almost every cop in there, because of Stan's influence or Jennifer's influence or my influence, had started going to church and had accepted Christ. And the hardest problem they had to get rid of was their swearing. And so they put something in place to help them stop swearing. The swear jar. Let me tell you, this thing filled up. We had enough money in there to buy Christmas dinner for everybody. But the whole atmosphere of the place changed when we started doing that. Now, this was just quiet, respectful exercise of influence. Nobody said anything. It was what we didn't say that made the difference. But God used it. Oh, no, by the way, the director stopped swearing too. Okay? Father, we thank you so much for giving us this time together today, and we pray that you'll be with everyone here today. Help us to seek your will in all that we do and make you proud of us. In your loving name we ask these things. Amen.